did punk and reggae come together then? So
Well, one of the things that we decided was that we didn't, that in the past, music had always been used on the stage either for benefits, to raise money for causes, for whatever, but never had people thought about the theatre of actually putting black and white bands together on a stage, and how that in itself was a political statement. And you didn't need slogans so much, because previous to this, in the main, black bands had played to black audiences. I can remember clearly going to the Four Aces Club in Dalston, and I was the only white person there among hundreds of black people. Likewise, you know, you saw that photograph upstairs where there's one black woman among a sea of white faces. It was the same, and until Rock Against Racism came along, nobody ever thought of mixing the two genres together, and that was our big political idea, if you see what I mean. That was the way in which we thought we could theatrically express a point of view and put forward an argument without an argument. It was a visual argument and theatrical one.
yeah, in what way was it a visual argument and theatrical argument? Can you just expand on that?
Well, it was in the sense that we always had a jam session, for example, at the end of the gig. So the bands that had played, and we'd always mix black and white bands, would play together, and that visual act of togetherness, of course, was putting out a very potent political message, and but I think that Rock Against Racism really, although there were some important and great gigs, like I remember one at the Roundhouse with Aswad and the Adverts and Mitch Mitchell on the drums, and the guy from Manfred Mann, I've forgotten his name, the singer, he was singing, it was and Carol Grimes, a wonderful mixture of different musical genres, but it really, things changed for Rock Against Racism in 1977, when the crescendo of the drip, drip, drip of racist propaganda from the mainstream media, in particular, as the same old suspects as today, you know, the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, the Sun, and the Evening Standard, were constantly caricaturing, particularly young Afro-Caribbean men, or boys often, but they were being caricatured as muggers, and in the same way as the sort of bogey word now is radicalisation. It was muggers was the bogey word then, and in South London there was a series of raids by the Metropolitan Police in 30 homes around New Cross and Lewisham in May of '77, where they arrested 21 young people. Some were as young as 13, and some were arrested in their underpants and taken off to the police station. And when I say raids, they smashed the back doors down with sledgehammers and took these people away. And there was no evidence against any one of them. And it was clearly that the institution of the Metropolitan Police was an incredibly racist institution, and so people didn't just see themselves as fighting against the National Front and against the four-pint family fascist in the local pub, but they were fighting against a big organised institution that is the Metropolitan Police, particularly in London, but also in other cities around the country as well. And as a result of those raids, David Foster, who was the father of one of the people arrested, Christopher Foster, his son, was arrested and never charged, of course, set up the Lewisham 21 Defence Committee. That was picked up by the National Front, who organised, with the help, I might add, of the Metropolitan Police, to put a very provocative and intimidatory march through Lewisham and New Cross, which was basically to say, put people back in their place, and it was called the Anti-Mugging March. So we, and when I say we, I mean a whole collection of anti-racist, socialists, local people, Cypriots from Wood Green, people from Scotland, people from Bristol, people from all over the country came together to organise the anti-mugging march. And it was a day which changed the whole game, because it was a day of street fighting which went on from maybe 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. I know I got there that sort of time, and I left about 8 o'clock in the evening, and it was in August, so it was still daylight when I left, but it was the most exhausting day I ever remember. Fighting, photographing, running, but the police employed, there weren't that many National Fronters, maybe 300, I don't know, it was very hard to judge, but there was probably 10,000 anti-racists, and the police used a quarter of the entire Metropolitan Police and their entire mounted division. So every police horse in London was commandeered to go there, and they charged the demonstrators with batons swinging and made a path to get the National Front through. But the response was phenomenal. You know, people were throwing pieces of corrugated tin, scaffold poles, concrete blocks, anything they could. It was a battle, and it went on, as I say, until about 8 o'clock in the evening. The National Front had been bussed out of the area hours and hours earlier. The battle was mostly against the police. They only marched about a quarter of their march, and then they were bussed out of the area because they were, as Nick Griffin, the despicable leader of the BNP, British National Party, said, we took a right beating that day, and they did. It was. But the significant thing about that day also was that it inspired people, mostly in the Socialist Worker Party, but also in the Labour Party, and to set up the Anti-Nazi League. And the Anti-Nazi League was a broad front, and it was connected very much with the trades unions, so it had some financial weight. It could do things which Rock Against Racism couldn't, because they had money, because they had this input from the Labour Party, from the trades union movement in particular, and from organisations like the Indian Workers Association, Jewish organisations. It was a wonderful broad front of all sorts of people, but their aim was very different than Rock Against Racism, in the sense that theirs was aimed as their reason for existence was to stop the National Front winning electoral support. So it was very much a electoral campaign, whereas Rock Against Racism was much more about culture and propaganda, and about changing people's attitudes and people's ideas. And but we worked alongside.
Can you explain that? What was the relationship between Rock Against Racism and the Anti-Nazi League, institutionally?
There was no formal relationship at all. It was absolutely. I mean, we were very. I have to remember, Rock Against Racism was a very anarchic bunch of a mixture of people. And there weren't a lot of us. There was about a dozen of us in London who were regulars. There was quite a few people who came along from one meeting or another, but there was a core of at most a dozen people.
And who were they?
There were people like, some were very political, like Roger Huddle was a member of the SWP, there was Red Saunders who'd written the original letter, there was myself, there was Ruth Gregory, there was David Widgery, a well-known writer and East End GP, there was Tom Robinson, there was Clarence Baker from Misty in Roots, there was half of Aswad, Brinsley Ford would come along, there was Robert Galvin, Joe Reeford, and I think I probably missed somebody out, but it was a small core of people, and there was no formal. We didn't have any roles. We didn't have any titles. There wasn't like a general secretary and or whatever. It was a very ad hoc organisation. But the Anti-Nazi League, we approached the Anti-Nazi League about the idea of doing a carnival, which we wanted. We'd always gone. People like Red, Ruth, myself, Dave Widgery, always gone to Notting Hill Carnival, and we wanted to do something which we call Carnival, because we didn't.
So why had you gone to Notting Hill Carnival? Why?
Because we loved reggae and we loved the music and we loved the food, and it was great fun. It was the same reason as anyone else would go, because we actually really enjoyed it. It wasn't going as a political gesture. It was going as a great day out, but we often ended up fighting with the police on the other hand. But the idea of the carnival, when we approached the Anti-Nazi League, it in a way shows the difference between the two organisations. They said, oh, great idea, we could get a flatbed truck in the park, in Victoria Park. We particularly wanted to use Victoria Park because that's where the National Front had got 17% of the vote, so it was, and it was, we organised the carnival on the eve of the Greater London Council elections, the next one after they got their 17%. So it was an important time to do that. But we said, no, we don't want it on the back of a lorry. But the lorry idea is a good one. We'll take that, and we'll have lorries on the march, and we want to have a sort of anti-racist Woodstock. And they thought we were completely mad, but they did support us. I don't mean that there was any acrimony, but there were quite a lot of people in the Anti-Nazi League who I think saw Rock Against Racism as the entertainment wing of the Anti-Nazi League, which of course it wasn't. It was an entirely autonomous and different organisation. But it was, we did organise the carnival, and it was Tom Robinson who came on board first, and then X-Ray Specs, and then Steel Pulse, and they were the original lineup. And 2 weeks before the carnival, which was in April, I think 30th of April, in '78, 2 weeks before it, the Clash rang us up and they said, can we come and talk to you about this carnival you're organising? And we went to Red's studio, which was then in Great Windmill Street in Soho, and there was me and Red. I think we were the only ones there, and all the Clash came, the whole band, and Bernie Rhodes, their manager at the time, and he said, look, my lads want to do it, but we'll only do it if we use the money which you make from the carnival to buy a tank for Zimbabwe. And we went, what money? We're begging everybody we can to try and get the show on the road. Nobody's making any money out of this. This is, and the band basically went, get out of here, Bernie, and we're doing it. And that changed the game away because at that time the Clash were the hottest band in the country, and they were seen as a sort of, once they'd given it, once the word went out that they were playing too, I think a lot of people probably didn't believe it. We knew that we were going to have a successful, but we hoped to get 20,000 people. And I was living in central London at that time, in Charing Cross Road, and so I'd got given the job of looking after the Rock Against Racism side in Trafalgar Square, because we decided to march from Trafalgar Square to Victoria Park, which is 7 miles. And everybody said, nobody will march 7 miles. They'll all go straight to the park and see, the first band on, and you'll just be marching. So we organised 7 flatbed trucks. We had Misty in Roots, we had the Piranhas, we had the Ruts, the Mekons, bands all the way. So it was a party. We didn't want it to be a march. We wanted it to be a dancing, rocking party for 7 miles through London, and it was. And Virgin Records gave us 500,000 whistles, which we threw out from the lorries. So it was the noisiest demonstration you've ever seen, and it was great fun. I mean, the actual march was great fun. But I went to bed in Charing Cross Road, and I was on the 4th floor where we lived. And when you've organised something like this, you suddenly have that fear, like when you've got a party on, that nobody's going to turn up. There'll be 150 people and it'll all be an embarrassment. And but then as I went to sleep, I kept hearing people coming down Charing Cross Road singing Misty and Roots songs and Tom Robinson songs and Clash songs. I've got to go down. I went down the square. It must have been 6:30 or 7. It was just getting daylight, and there was already 10,000 people in Trafalgar Square, and apparently 37 buses, for example, had arrived at 11 o'clock at night from Glasgow, just as an example. It was, I mean, the numbers of people that came were just astronomical. And by 11 o'clock when the march left, there was 100,000 people.
And how was it organised? Where did people come from within the country? Who organised the buses?
The local RA groups. RA was it's very hard to explain how an organisation can exist without a formal structure. And it didn't have a formal structure. But if you were in Leeds, for example, and you decided you wanted to have a RA club, or we always, in the magazine we produced, Temporary Hoarding, had a thing called a gig guide. It told people how to do it. And we had a central office where we'd send people badges. Badges were important. I mean, I think we sold 4 million or something like that. That funded that was one of our biggest funders, was the selling of the Rock Against Racism badges. And really, because there were no rules, and because we didn't belong to a particular political point of view, it was a bit more anarchic than that. We were, then anybody could set up a Rock Against Racism group, and they did. And there was no, you didn't have to register with Central London RA. We had we produced the magazine and we produced the badges, but we were only a part of RA. RA was a real a genuine grassroots movement. It was nationwide and eventually international, but they were the people who, because we didn't have that organisation, we were never sure, and especially at the carnival, exactly how many people were coming. I didn't know 37 buses were coming from Glasgow. Nobody had told us. They just got on with it. And recently I had an exhibition in Glasgow, and I remember talking to people who'd come on those buses, and they went, "Oh yeah, we just did it. We booked the buses, and we knew we had to be there."